1 second. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicholas Prevellakis on the Center for Hellenic Studies. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'm going to be moderating this event. We're going to do introductions of all the participants. But before that, first of all, I'm going to give the floor to Mark Shevsky, Director of the Center for Hellenic Studies, for a few words about this event and its meaning.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Nicholas. Excuse me. It's a pleasure to see everybody here today, and a pleasure for me to welcome you to this discussion of the long Italian Philhellenism on behalf of the Center for Hellenic Studies. I don't want to say anything very long, simply to note that Philhellenism is, of course, a phenomenon that has not only a pan-European, but also a global history and significance, and as such is very much at the center of what we study at the CHS. I would just note that our center was, of course, founded through an act of generous philanthropy and Philhellenism in the American context. And for that reason, if for no other, we should be concerned with its history. So without further ado, let me pass it back over to Nicholas. I look forward to this discussion very much. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mark. We are all very happy today to be welcoming Francesco Scalora, who is a fellow at the Center for Hellenic Studies, a fellow in Philhellenism. This is a series of fellowships that the Center for Hellenic Studies started on the occasion of the 200th anniversary of the Greek Revolution. But the idea is to explore that phenomenon more broadly. Francesco will soon present the research that he's done in the last year, but then more broadly talk to us about Italian Philhellenism. And then we will have a conversation with two distinguished panelists. The first is Costandina Zanu, Assistant Professor of Italian at Columbia University and author recently of a book that won many prizes, Transnational Patriotism in the Mediterranean, 1800 to 1850, Stammering the Nation, about the transition from empires to nation state in the region. And then Joanna Hanning, Professor of Classics at Brown and dear friend, author of The Classical Debt, Greek Antiquity in an Era of Austerity, and then recently translation of Stories of Karkavitsas, very much interested again in the relationship between Greece and perceptions of Greece abroad. We have done this as a Zoom, which means that everyone can see everyone. If you have questions as our panelists speak, please feel free to put them in the chat. But also, we encourage you to raise your hand so that then we can give you the floor, so you can ask the questions or make comments directly. Without further ado, Francesco, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicola. Today's presentation concludes a journey for me, a journey which lasted a year. So I should like to thank, if I may say so, my fellow travelers, the director of the Center for Hellenic Studies, Mark Shevsky, the members of the advisory committee of the Fellowship in Philhellenism, Richard Martin, Paschalis Kitromilidis, and Nicholas Prevellakis, Zoe Lafis, Executive Director, and for me, an ideal neighbor here in Washington, Evangelos Katsarelis, for his patience and care, and with him, the whole group of the Center for Hellenic Studies in Greece. It has been a great journey. Finally, my thanks go to the three respondents, Johanna, Nicholas, and Constantina, and the whole audience. Your presence greatly honored me. Now, let's move on to the presentation. The peculiarity of the Italian Philhellenic movement is mainly distinguished by two phenomena. For the Philhellenic literary production published during the years of the Greek Revolution, and for the active participation of Italian volunteers who came to fight in Greece. To date, scholars have paid particular attention to the first phenomenon, neglecting to investigate the significant contribution of a considerable number of exiles and patriots who went to Greece fighting alongside the Greek insurgents. There are few statistical data available on the number of Italians who went to Greece. Little or nothing is also known about their activity on Greece. First came the memories of great deeds. Like the other Europeans and the Americans who came to the aid of the Greeks, the Italians also had their legendary Philhellenes. Pietro Gamba, Giuseppe Pecchio, Sant'Orre di Santa Rosa are the best known names. In the shadow of the most famous ones, however, the activity of individual personalities is hidden, whose contribution deserves attention as well. Their political and cultural activity and the ideological dimension in which they acted restores to us the image of a complex phenomenon, matured in the shadow of great names and enterprises. The fellowship in Philhellenism, offered on the occasion of the celebration of the 200 years since the outbreak of the Greek Revolution, gave me the opportunity to fully deal with the case of Cesare Vitali and to study in detail his unpublished diary, now published for the first time at the prestigious series Quaderni of the Istituto Siciliano di Studi Bizantini e Neoellenici Bruno Lavagnini. Vitali's diary, written in Italian, covers the revolutionary years from April 1821 to May 1827. Of Italian origins, Cesare Vitali went to Athens in the first years of the 19th century. Ephoros of the Philomusos Society of Athens and vice consul of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Cesare Vitali is known to Greek historiography for having written a medical report in Italian for the death of Odysseus Androutsos. However, his Athenian activity and the different relationships he had with numerous Greek personalities during the years of the Greek Revolution can be reconstructed on the basis of a rich and unknown documentation. Vitali's diary brings to light the activity of an Italian personality who acted in an Athenian environment during the crucial years of the revolution. He records facts and events were already perceived at the time as part of a major epic, the epic of the Greek Revolution, whose history, as often happens with great epics, was narrated for a long time, the time of the long Philhellenism. These words, perhaps very suggestive, introduce us to the topic that I will try to present today. How difficult it is to try mounting the Greek eagle's back. I borrow the verses of the Italian poet Mario Rapisardi, which I had already used in one other my paper dedicating to the Sicilian Philhellenism and recently published in the tome The Greek Revolution in the Age of Revolutions, edited by Paschalis Kitromilidis, considering that these verses properly introduce us to the topic that I will try to present today. This to confirm that the very vast Philhellenic literature is open to different interpretations. So, how difficult it is to try mounting the Greek eagle's back? With these words, Mario Rapisardi grasps the importance of the Greek Revolution, dedicating ample space to the memory of that historical event in the canto 8, entitled Le Rivoluzioni, of his poem La Palingenesi, published in Florence in 1868. Ingenious rather than brilliant in concept, the poem was well received due to the young poet's generous audacity, which in times of religious, moral, political stagnation, and because of the fervor provoked by the Roman issue, contemplated apalingenesis, a revival of the evangelical spirit, a close harmony between science and faith, church and state, bringing to light the merits and defects of a Risorgimento narrated in a free and easy manner. Rapisardi singles out from the bas-reliefs of history those moments that, in his opinion, strongly contributed to the renewal of humanity. From the biblical tradition, he moves on to the Middle Ages, from the Crusades to the Reformation, from the French Revolution to the Italian Risorgimento, considering the Greek Revolution and the other contemporary revolutions as fundamental historical events which aims were to open a Mediterranean path to political modernity. In the delicate and perhaps premature attempt to narrate in less triumphalist terms the recent events of the Italian Risorgimento, Rapisardi fully understands the extraordinary natural cycle of the revolutions that took place in the Mediterranean in the first half of the 19th century. Far from the widely depreciative historiographical readings of the following century, which would have marked the insurrections of 1820-21 as the enchanting gasp of a generation of patriots, Rapisardi anticipates a transnational reading of a patriotism that would have been able to spread new horizons to the politics of the early 19th century. By defining national movements in terms of a deep ideological exchange and insisting on the supranational dimension of events, Rapisardi seems to understand both the importance of the Greek Revolution and the deep ideological connection between the Greek Revolution and the Italian Risorgimento. The Greek War of Independence and the Italian Risorgimento was two phenomena with a nearly parallel evolution. Greece opposed the century-old Ottoman occupation, whereas Italy opposed the Austrian domination. The Greek Revolution thus became an example of rebellion to be followed. The Ottoman domination from which Greece had partially liberated itself symbolized the Austrian domination from which Italy had yet to free itself. Viewed from this perspective, the Greek Revolution is perceived in all the triumphant rhetoric of the duality oppressor, independence, slavery. It became, at the same time, the fulcrum of various currents of thought: liberalism and nationalism, Romanticism and classical tradition. During the long era of Italian Philhellenism, the interest in modern Greece was not only political, military, and ideological. On several occasions, the Italians looked to Greece with a concrete interest in places and inhabitants, cultural activity, and the literary production. In the second half of the 19th century, once Romantic enthusiasm had faded, in Europe, the interest in modern Greece gradually diminished. The new reality of Greece did not live up to the expectations of those who had persistently approached it through the lens of a mythical classical Greece. However, in Italy, interest in modern Greece was constant. The Philhellenism of the Risorgimento period was gradually replaced by an interest in the culture of modern Greece and by the wish to investigate the character and the most significant aspect of Greek civilization. Greece was now viewed in relation to its European context with emphasis on its present, leaving out spurious comparison with its past. After these general considerations, this section of the presentation will focus on Rapisardi's verses by answering some questions. First, why in 1868, in the aftermath of the Italian unification, and more than 30 years after the birth of the Greek state, why Rapisardi and many other Italian poets feel the need of writing about the Greek Revolution? Are his verses Philhellenic? What role do Canaris, Bojaris, Bubulina, and the other heroes of the Greek Revolution play in the Italian political scenarios of the second half of 19th century? These issues, in my opinion, are crucial, as they allow us to concentrate on the evolution and the evaluation of a particular historical phenomenon. First of all, we will need to find a shared definition of Philhellenism in order to properly apply the concept in our analysis. The word Philhellenism can indeed be used in the specific historical context of the Greek War of Independence, but can also refer to a wide range of ideological, cultural, and social backgrounds. As George Tolias pointed out in his article entitled The Resilience of Philhellenism, the broad dissemination of Philhellenic notions and their varied uses in different environments is a challenging field for researchers, as well as the main impediment to any attempt at synthesis, since the phenomenon manifested itself in dissimilar ways and for different time periods. The shared solidarity of public opinion in the West during the years of the Greek Revolution affected various domains, from political activism, art and literature, to aspects of social and even everyday life, given that it became something of a vogue. As an opinion movement, Philhellenic commitments were marked by varying degrees of intensity and participation. From the volunteers who came to fight in revolutionary Greece, to the many who remained active in their own countries, organizing Philhellenic network and Philhellenic committees. And finally, to the majority who absorbed and consumed Philhellenic rhetoric and production, participating in a sort of Philhellenic fashion. It is worth repeating it. The broad dissemination of Philhellenic notions and their varied uses in different environments make difficult any attempt at synthesis. The other issue that needs to be taken into account relate to the chronological of Philhellenism. Does Philhellenism end with the birth of the Greek state or not? And if it does continue, can we still call it Philhellenism? It is only something of a Philhellenic vogue, or there is something else? In this regard, Italy is a valuable case study. The Italian interest for the revolutionary cause of Greece did not seem to fade after the recognition of an independent state in 1830. The long tradition of exchanges between Italian and Greek revolutionaries was renewed in the most important phases of the independence fate of the two countries. Examples of this tradition are the participation of Greek revolutionaries in the Italian insurrections in 1848, and the warm welcome received by the Italian exiles in Greece on more than one occasion, especially in 1848-49. On the eve of the Italian unification, this brotherhood sentiment between the two countries became stronger and offered new occasions for collaboration and solidarity. The new Philhellenic season, starting in 1859, will last for the entire second half of 19th century. The most representative phases of this season were Garibaldi's expeditions in Greece on the occasion of Crete's insurrections of 1866 and 1896, the latter leading to the Greek-Ottoman conflict of 1897. Also in these occasions, the shared solidarity of public opinion in the West and in Italy affected various domains, from political activism, art and literature, from the volunteers who came to fight in Greece, to the Philhellenic networks and the Philhellenic committees. It is interesting to note how at the end of the Greek War of Independence, the Greek Revolution was still of interest for Italian public opinion. It would seem that for almost a century, Italy never stopped looking at Greece. The myth of the Greek Revolution shed light on the negative aspects of the Italian Risorgimento and the difficulties of the aftermath of the Italian unification. It was a sort of Philhellenic revival that immediately revealed the political weakness of the Risorgimento rhetoric of the beginning of the century, which was applied to an international economic, diplomatic, and strategic context that did not justify any particular sympathy between Greece and Italy. The epic of nationality had given way to that of nationalism, and the Philhellenic impulses lost relevance. A late and not so fervent phase of Philhellenism in a climate of a revised Risorgimento, where emerged the ideological tension, the disappointments, and the frustration of a troubled path. In this political, ideological, and cultural context, the Greek Revolution continued to have a symbolic function, to be a model, an ideal reference. In conclusion, to what extent Rapisardi's verses are Philhellenic? Maybe they are not at all. It all depends on what we mean by Philhellenism. Laura Richards, in the edition of letters and journals by his father, the Philhellene Dr. Samuel Hoare, who graduated at Harvard Medical School in 1824, defined Philhellenism as following. The term Philhellene may not mean very much today, but in the early 20s of the 19th century, it was a word to conjure with. It meant a man, generally a young man, who was ready and eager to give up his custom money-getting and go oversized to fight a savage foe among savage mountains, all for love of freedom and of that dear land which was next in his affections to his own, the land of the imperishable ideal. In 1861, Niccolò Tommaseo wrote an entry about Philhellenism for the Dizionario della Lingua Italiana and called Philhellenes all the Europeans that shoot their affection to Greece with their sword, writing, and with weapons and money. Tommaseo refers to the historical Philhellenism of the revolutionary years, which is slightly different from the one described by Laura Richards. Perhaps less sentimental, but always connected to the land of the eternal ideal that has never stopped guiding us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Francesco, for this all-encompassing talk, which shows once more not only how important Italian Philhellenism has been for modern Greece, but also the various things that Philhellenism has represented and the various things that Philhellenism has projected upon Greece and what it meant for them. I'm going to pass it on to Konstantina now for some comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, hi, Francesco. You can hear me, right? Okay. So, Francesco, thank you so much for this, but also for your valuable work in general. I know not only this diary that you have published, but also your work on Sicilian Philhellenism, which I very much appreciate. And so my first question connects to the work you have done, but also to the mentions, your point about Philhellenism having multiple meanings. Okay, and so I totally agree with that, and not only through time, as you suggested in your presentation, but also through space, even during the revolution itself, and later. So we can say that Philhellenism, being a global phenomenon, it actually tells us much more for the societies which produced it than for Greece itself. And these societies being so different between them, we should expect to have as many different Philhellenisms as people who were Philhellens. And so I think that the most interesting aspect of Philhellenism for those who study Philhellenism, and you have done it partially in your book on Sicily, on Sicilian Philhellenism, is to see what this Philhellenism tells us about the aspirations of the people who practiced it, of the people who were Philhellenes. And you very well analyze in your book how the Sicilians specifically pointed out, stressed some aspects of Philhellenism which were important for the autonomy of Sicily, for their own political aspirations. So one of my question here is that I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on the various phases, the different phases of Italian Philhellenism before the unification of Italy, and how these different Philhellenisms between the different Italian states tell us, different things, how they are different, right? This is one of the things that interest me. My second question, and I think I will stop with this too, is that I find your publication of the diary of Cesare Vitali very important, and I'm sorry that it's not published in English or in Greek so that I can teach it. I haven't been able to read it yet. I've read only your introduction, everything I could find online. So I would really love to hear more details about that diary, to hear, the things that impressed you more. What is it that it tells us about the author? Did he write, what does it tell us as a literary genre, the diary? Did he write that diary like Mario Pieri, Mario Pieri, the case of Mario Pieri, like he wrote that diary in view of reading it to his friends or publishing it later? Or was it just notes that he took just for himself as a consul? Or I want to know something more about the literary genre, the way of writing, but also I want to know a little bit more about how Cesare Vitali felt in Athens, what kind of identities he had, what kind of participation, and what does he describe in there? Thank you. I will stop here for the moment. Thank you so much.
Francesco, we cannot hear you.
Sorry. Now yes. Huh? Oh, sorry. And thank you so much, Konstantina. So, θα απαντήσω στα ελληνικά, όπως είχαμε και ο Νικόλας θα μας βοηθήσει με την μετάφραση. Τότε οι δικές μου απαντήσεις θα είναι σύντομες, ούτως ώστε να έχει τη δυνατότητα ο Νικόλας να κάνει τη μετάφραση και να μην γίνει η δουλειά αυτή πολύ περίπλοκη.
Just to clarify, I'll do my best to translate, Francesco, right?
Okay.
So please be tolerant. And,
σχετικά με την πρώτη ερώτηση που έκανε η Κωνσταντίνα, έχει ενδιαφέρον το εξής. Όχι μόνο οι διάφορες φάσεις του φιλελληνισμού ή του ιταλικού φιλελληνισμού, όσο το γεγονός ότι θα έπρεπε να μιλήσουμε τουλάχιστον για την περίπτωση της Ιταλίας, σίγουρα για το πρώτο ήμιση του 19ου αιώνα, για πολλούς φιλελληνισμούς. Γιατί βασικά δεν έχουμε ακόμα μια Ιταλία, μια ενοποιημένη Ιταλία. Η περίπτωση της Σικελίας είναι μια πάρα πολύ ιδιαίτερη περίπτωση. Και εγώ νομίζω ότι αν κάποιος πάει και ψάχνει την περίπτωση του φιλελληνισμού του Βένετο ή της Ρώμης ή της Νάπολης κτλ., θα βγουν ακόμα περισσότεροι φιλελληνισμοί.
Okay, one second, Francesco. Let me just summarize, not translate, but summarize that, right? That different phases, not only different phases in Italian Philhellenism, but many Philhellenism, especially in the first half of the 19th century, especially since there's not one Italy at that time, right? And that in many ways, and also the fact that Sicily is a specific place. One should see exactly what's happening in Sicily, what's happening in Rome, what happens in Napoli.
Αυτό είναι κατά τη γνώμη το πιο σημαντικό και νομίζω ότι είναι ένα ζήτημα που όσον αφορά και όχι μόνο τον Ιταλικό φιλελληνισμό πάει μαζί. Δηλαδή θα έπρεπε τουλάχιστον με αφορμή την επέτειο των 200 χρόνων από την έναρξη της Ελληνικής Επανάστασης, από τα διάφορα συνέδρια που έχουν γίνει κτλ., τουλάχιστον να μας μείνουν, πώς να το πω, μερικές μεθοδολογικές κατευθύνσεις. Δηλαδή, τι εννοούμε για φιλελληνισμό, ποιες είναι οι φάσεις του φιλελληνισμού, ποιοι είναι οι διάφοροι φιλελληνισμοί και, εν πάση περιπτώσει, τι κάνουμε με αυτόν τον φιλελληνισμό μετά την Ελληνική Επανάσταση. Αυτό πρέπει να το αποφασίσουμε κάποια στιγμή. Εμένα με λένε Φιλέλληνας, γιατί μιλάω ελληνικά, έρχομαι στην Ελλάδα, αγαπάω την Ελλάδα. Ο Φιλέλληνας μπορεί να είναι αυτός που πάει το καλοκαίρι στα νησιά. Αυτό μεθοδολογικά παρουσιάζει διάφορα σοβαρά θέματα. Και νομίζω ότι πρέπει κάποια στιγμή να σταματήσουμε, να κανονίσουμε πού πάμε και τι θέλουμε τι εννοούμε με αυτή την λέξη. Αν πρέπει να σταθούμε μόνο στο ιστορικό φιλελληνισμό, που είναι ο φιλελληνισμός που κρατά καθ' όλη την διάρκεια της Ελληνικής Επαναστάσεως, και τι γίνεται με το δεύτερο φιλελληνισμό, με τον τρίτο φιλελληνισμό, με τον φιλελληνισμό με τον Γαριβαλδινών κτλ.
Okay. Again, Francesco, let me summarize quickly. Right, you're raising a methodological question about the meaning of the word Philhellenism, and you say that on the occasion, especially now of the 200 years of the Greek Revolution and all the conferences that have taken place, it's a time to reflect on the different phases, the different meanings of Philhellenism, especially since there is a historical meaning, more strict of Philhellenism that has to do with this movement that happens around the Greek Revolution, and then many ways in which we use that term even today in contemporary Greece to speak, for instance, to refer to people who just speak Greek or like to go to the islands because as tourists. And so there's a methodological confusion that you think should be at least addressed, and we should make some methodological choices.
Okay. Αυτό νομίζω σχετικά με την πρώτη ερώτηση. Η δεύτερη ερώτηση πραγματικά έχει να κάνει με το ημερολόγιο του Τσέσαρε Βιτάλη. Για τον Τσέσαρε Βιτάλη ξέραμε απλώς ότι ήταν αυτό που θα λέγαμε σήμερα ο ιατροδικαστής του Οδυσσέα Ανδρούτσου. Τίποτα άλλο. Απλώς ο Βλαχογιάννης γνώρισε πάρα πολύ καλά ότι στα γενικά αρχεία του κράτους υπήρχαν τα ημερολόγια, τα ιστορικά ημερολόγια του Τσέσαρε Βιτάλη. Η ιδέα για το ημερολόγιο, για την έκδοση του ημερολογίου του Βιτάλη γεννήθηκε τον Νοέμβρη του 20. Τότε η δασκάλα μου έλεγε αν μπορούσαμε να ετοιμάσουμε κάτι για τις εκδόσεις του Ινστιτούτου με αφορμή τα 200 χρόνια από την έναρξη της Ελληνικής Επανάστασης. Επειδή δεν είμαι ικανός να πω όχι στην δασκάλα μου, στην κυρία Λαβανίνη, είπα ότι ναι, θα κάνουμε το ημερολόγιο του Τσέσαρε Βιτάλη. Δεν είχα καταλάβει όμως τι ήταν αυτό το ημερολόγιο του Τσέσαρε Βιτάλη, ότι είναι ένα πάρα πολύ δύσκολο ημερολόγιο, γραμμένο με περίεργα ιταλικά. Ο Βιτάλη πλέον την εποχή εκείνη μιλάει 2 γλώσσες. Μιλάει ελληνικά, ιταλικά και η γυναίκα του είναι Γαλλίδα, αυτό που έχω ανακαλύψει. Τότε βασικά το ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλη είναι κάτι το πολύ δύσκολο, όχι μόνο στην μεταγραφή του κειμένου, αλλά επίσης τα ιταλικά που χρησιμοποιεί ο ίδιος ο Βιτάλη.
Francesco, let me again stop here and make sure I don't forget.
Yeah.
Right. So Vitali was known for having made the medical report for the death of Odysseus Androutsos. But then you say that it was in November 2020, in the context of a publication suggested to you by your teacher at the time, that you underwent that project of looking into the diary that presents some difficulties, in part because of the language, since that diary uses a mix of Italian, Greek, and perhaps also French through the influence of his wife, and the Italian is particularly tricky.
Και όλο αυτό φαίνεται στο ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλη. Ο Βιτάλη γράφει στα Ιταλικά και ξαφνικά σου βάζει λέξεις στα Τούρκικα, στα Ελληνικά, στα Γαλλικά, στα Ισπανικά, ό,τι του έρχεται πλέον. Αυτό είναι πολύ σημαντικό. Το δεύτερο πολύ σημαντικό πράγμα που αφορά το ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλη είναι ότι είναι το μοναδικό ημερολόγιο που εμείς έχουμε για την επαναστατημένη Αθήνα, που καλύπτει 7 χρόνια, τα 7 χρόνια της Ελληνικής Επανάστασης. Ο Βιτάλη είναι δραστήριος, γνωρίζει τους πάντες, δεν τους λείπει κανένα. Δηλαδή, τον Μακρυγιάννη, τον Αντρούτσο, όλους αυτούς που μπορείτε να φανταστείτε, τους ήρωες της Επαναστάσεως, τους ξέρει, είναι σε επαφή κτλ. Βασίζεται κυρίως στο γεγονός ότι ζει τα γεγονότα, τα μεγάλα αυτά γεγονότα. Και αυτό είναι πολύ σημαντικό. Μετά έχει και μικρά κομμάτια μικρής ιστορίας. Είναι τα κομμάτια που, ας πούμε, υπάρχει μια σχέση ανάμεσα σε μια κοπέλα και ένα αγόρι που ερωτεύονται στο μπαζάρ των Αθηνών και σκοτώνει ένας άλλος ερωτευόμενος, σκοτώνει τον άντρα. Έχει αυτά τα πράγματα της μικρής ιστορίας. Το άλλο πολύ σημαντικό επίσης, που για μένα είναι πολύ σημαντικό και στην εισαγωγή αφιέρωσα μερικές σελίδες, είναι η Οθωμανική Αθήνα. Είναι εντυπωσιακή η Οθωμανική Αθήνα. Είναι μια άλλη πόλη, μακριά από την λευκή πόλη του φωτός που έχουμε εμείς σήμερα στο μυαλό μας. Είναι μια πόλη της Ανατολής. Είναι μια πόλη της Ανατολής, στην οποία ζουν μαζί Έλληνες, Αλβανοί, Ορθόδοξοι, Μουσουλμάνοι, τι άλλο, Ευρωπαίοι που μένουν κυρίως στο Τησείο και τα λοιπά. Μία άλλη διαφορετική Αθήνα. Το άλλο διαφορετικό, και με αυτό κλείνω, είναι η εικόνα της Ακρόπολης. Εμείς είμαστε συνηθισμένοι να έχουμε υπόψη μας μια τέλεια Ακρόπολη. Η Ακρόπολη πάλι του λευκού και του φωτός. Η Ακρόπολη του Βιτάλη και της Οθωμανικής Αθήνας είναι μια Ακρόπολη στην οποία ζουν, σε περίπτωση ανάγκης, σχεδόν 3.000 άτομα που έχουν φαγητό και ποτό, νερό κτλ. Για τουλάχιστον 2-3 χρόνια. Τότε σπιτάκια, κήπους. Ο Αντρούτσος έζησε στην Ακρόπολη μαζί με την μητέρα του, παραδείγματος χάριν. Ο Βιτάλη μας δίνει αυτή την εικόνα, μια εικόνα μιας άλλης Αθήνας, της Οθωμανικής Αθήνας, αλλά της ελπίδας μιας καινούριας Αθήνας, μιας ευρωπαϊκής Αθήνας. Και ο Βιτάλη το έχει πολύ σαφές αυτό το πράγμα, ότι η Αθήνα και η Ελλάδα είναι ευρωπαϊκή χώρα.
Thank you. Okay, Francesco, let me summarize again super quickly. Yeah. Important things in Vitali's diary. Number one, it's perhaps the only diary that we have that encompasses the 7 years of the Greek Revolution. Vitali is a person who knows everyone, Androutsos, Makrigiannis, all the big figures. He's lived the events. He focuses on big events of that history, but as well as in smaller events such as love affairs and connected murders, faits divers. Number two, he depicts an image of Athens that's different than what we are used to, namely Ottoman Athens, a city that's different than the white city of light, that's the term that you used, and that looks like an oriental city in which Greeks, Albanians, Orthodox Muslims, and Europeans coexist. And number three, connected to the second, an image of the Acropolis that's again different from the kind of sterilized and reconstructed image that we have now, in which something like 3,000 people live there. And so we follow their everyday life. Again, in that Acropolis, that's the Acropolis of an Ottoman city, not the one that we see today.
Τελευταία πρόκληση σχετικά με την έκδοση του ημερολογίου του Βιτάλη είναι τα διάφορα ονόματα και τα τοπονύμια. Ο Βιτάλη τα γράφει έτσι όπως τα ακούει. Εγώ επειδή κυρίως, όπως λέω πάντα, πριν γεννήθηκα ως φιλόλογος και μετά έγινα κατά κάποιον τρόπο ιστορικός και μετά τι συμβαίνει, ότι κανείς δεν είναι ούτε φιλόλογος ούτε ιστορικός. Τέλος πάντων είναι η δουλειά του νέου ελληνιστή. Αυτό το πιστεύω ακράγαντα. Είναι ότι έπρεπε κάτι να κάνουμε με αυτά τα τοπονύμια και με αυτά τα ονόματα. Αυτό που είχα κάνει αρχικά είναι η δουλειά που κάνει ο φιλόλογος. Ο Βιτάλη γράφει Γυφυσιά, με γάμα, Γυφυσιά ή ξέρω εγώ τι άλλο. Ο φιλόλογος τι κάνει? Κάνει ένα debut Γυφυσιά. Λάθος. Τότε η επιλογή μου ήταν ότι στον σχολιασμό των τοπονυμίων και των πρωταγωνιστών της Επανάστασης κτλ. Επέλεξα να πάρω ένα δείγμα 100 έργων Ευρωπαίων περιηγηθών στην Ελλάδα και να δω πώς ο καθένας ονομάζει, ας πούμε, την Ακρόπολη, την Κηφισιά, το Ψηρή, τότε δεν λεγόταν Ψηρή ακόμα, ή όλα τα τοπονύμια της επαναστατημένης Ελλάδος. Και αυτό το κατάλαβα ευτυχώς, γιατί χάρη σε αυτό δεν διόρθωσα τον Βιτάλη. Αυτά τα κείμενα δεν θέλουν διόρθωση, θέλουν απλώς κάτι άλλο. Ο σχολιασμός τότε κυρίως είναι αυτό στο ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλη.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francesco, right, for raising that issue. That one of the other tricky points in the diary is the use of names, and especially names of places. Example you gave, Kifisia, which is now a suburb of Athens, that he mentions it as Gifisia with a G. And that one way in which philologists typically used to deal with these things is to quote unquote correct them. But what you did is instead went and saw what travelers of that period, other travelers, had done and the ways in which they used names and then make commentaries on the use of these terms. It's a hugely important issue, since we know how very well how names of places were changed, right, during and after the Greek Revolution to make them more Hellenic, should I say. Thank you. Let's move to Joanna, because we have 15 minutes left, and would like to hear Joanna, and then maybe she has some questions for you as well.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Francesco, for sharing your work, for undertaking this incredibly important work. This is really just such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to hear you present on it with this group. And I do see that we're starting to get questions in the chat, Nicola. So I'll keep my own questions very brief. And I suppose, if I may start, the first really picks up on the last point that you were mentioning with the diary. And you were saying that, Vitali's description of Athens is this Ottoman Eastern city that does not really resemble the way that either Athens looks today, or that it is, it might be idealized. But I do wonder, when one reads these early travelers' accounts, whether in French or English or whatever, they do kind of all start to sound a bit the same in some ways. So I was wondering if maybe you could tell us sort of what you find particularly unique in Vitali's diary compared to other European travelers of the same period. What kinds of differences are there? I hope that makes sense.
Σχετικά, ποιες είναι οι διαφορές? Ας πούμε, για τα ημερολόγια που έχουμε για την ίδια εποχή, για την επαναστατημένη Ελλάδα, ημερολόγια, γιατί κάτι άλλο είναι τα απομνημονεύματα, που γράφτηκαν κυρίως ύστερα από πέρα 10, 30, 40 χρόνια, για όλη τη διάρκεια του 19ου αιώνα, έχουμε ακόμα απομνημονεύματα. Το ζήτημα με το ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλη είναι ότι ο Βιτάλη γράφει σχεδόν κάθε μέρα. Μερικές φορές η γραφή του Βιτάλη καθευτρίζει κατά κάποιον τρόπο τον τρόμο που ακούει τους βομβαρδισμούς στην Ακρόπολη. Είναι μια γραφή που φαίνεται στα χειρόγραφα, μια γραφή που τρέμει. Αυτό που είπα και πριν, απαντώντας στην Κωνσταντίνα, είναι ότι είναι το μοναδικό ημερολόγιο που έχουμε σίγουρα σε ξένη γλώσσα, αλλά κυρίως για την επαναστατημένη Αθήνα, το μοναδικό ημερολόγιο που έχουμε για την ελληνική επανάσταση και για την επαναστατημένη Αθήνα. Ο Βιτάλη δεν γράφει μόνο για μια χρονιά. Είναι το 25, που είναι η χρονιά που σίγουρα είναι υποπρόξενος του βασιλείου των δύο Σικελιών. Λέει ο Βιτάλη, επειδή είμαι πρόξενος, είμαι διπλωμάτης, δεν μπορώ να γράψω κάτι προσωπικά για την ελληνική επανάσταση. Είναι η μοναδική χρονιά στην οποία δεν γράφει τίποτα. Σε σχέση με τα άλλα ημερολόγια ή τα άλλα απομνημονεύματα που έχουμε για την ελληνική επανάσταση, είναι ότι και ο Βιτάλης, επειδή πλέον ζει στην Ελλάδα από 20 χρόνια από τότε που ξεκίνησε η ελληνική επανάσταση, ο Βιτάλη έχει και αυτός διάφορες συμπάθειες πολιτικές. Τότε δεν έχει ιδιαίτερη συμπάθεια για τον Ανδρούτσο. Δεν είναι και ο μόνος στην εποχή εκείνη. Δεν έχει ιδιαίτερη συμπάθεια για μερικούς Φιλέλληνες. Μερικές φορές δεν έχει ιδιαίτερη συμπάθεια για τους ίδιους τους Έλληνες, που λένε είναι αυτό, εκεί χρειάζεται μια μεγάλη έρευνα που έχω ξεκινήσει, έχει να κάνει με την αξιοπιστία των Ελλήνων στην μάχη. Την λεγόμενη Fides Graeca, αυτό μπορείτε να το βρείτε ήδη στην κλασική λατινική γραμματεία, ή αυτό που λέγεται αττική πίστης. Πόσο αξιόπιστοι είναι οι Έλληνες. Είναι ένα πολύ ιδιαίτερο, πώς το λένε, μια πολύ ιδιαίτερη άποψη που έχει ένας Φιλέλληνας την εποχή εκείνη. Συγγνώμη, Νικόλα.
Okay. No, Francesco, thank you very much. And again, I'll try to summarize quickly. First, you made this important distinction between a diary and a memoir. We have many memoirs of the Greek Revolution written afterwards. This is a diary, so it's written really every day during the events. And that gives a lot of richness. The second point is that one element that's dominant in the diary is fear, right? That you see in the writing have fear connected to the bombings of Acropolis or all the events that are happening. So fear is a dominant feature there. You said that Vitaly writes almost every day and every year, with the exception of 1825, because at that time he was consul of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and in this official position he couldn't write for political reasons about events that were happening. And the other thing that you said, which is interesting, to me at least, is that in the diary he expresses sympathies and antipathies. And you mentioned his antipathy for Androuchos, for some other Philhellenes, for some Greeks, and also this kind of concern that he has that Greeks do not live up to expectations, especially regarding their fitness in battle. I want to use this to ask a quick question. You mentioned in your talk the fact that at some point in Europe, many people become disappointed with Greece. And one person that comes to mind, for instance, very well known, is Edmond About, wrote about contemporary Greece. People who go to Greece in the second half of the 19th century think they're going to discover Pericles and the glory of ancient Greece. This is not what they're seeing. They get very disappointed. Do you find similar things in Italy? And do you find something like that in the diaries of Vitaly? Or is this not a question for these persons?
Το ζήτημα με τους περιηγητές, όπως και επίσης κατά κάποιον τρόπο το βλέπουμε στην Βιτάλη, έχει πολύ, πολύ ενδιαφέρον. Μαζί με τον φιλελληνισμό γεννιέται ο μισελληνισμός. Είναι δύο φαινόμενα που τρέχουν μαζί και έχουν πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον. Είναι αρκετά σημαντικό για τον λεγόμενο μη ελληνισμός, είναι επίσης κάτι που δεν γεννιέται την παραμονή της Επαναστάσεως. Είναι κάτι που πάει πολύ πίσω στα χρόνια. Αν κανείς παίρνει την χρήση της λέξης Λεβαντίνο, ο Λεβαντίνος είναι, πριν γίνει αυτό που ξέρουμε στα τέλη του 10ου αιώνα, ο Λεβαντίνο, αν κανείς το παίρνει τη λέξη αυτή στις πηγές της Βενετίας, της Πίζας, εκεί που υπάρχει βασικά το εμπόριο στην θάλασσα, ο Λεβαντίνος είναι ο απατεώνας. Ο Λεβαντίνος είναι αυτός που δεν κρατάει τον λόγο. Οι περιηγητές, εκεί τα πράγματα αλλάζουν. Αυτοί οι άνθρωποι έρχονται βασικά πάρα πολύ διαβασμένοι στην Ελλάδα. Με την ιδέα ότι θα συναντήσουν, όπως είπε, τον Περικλή στον δρόμο, τον Αριστοτέλη σε μια γωνία και τον Πλάτωνα κάτω από την σκιά της Ακρόπολης. Όταν φτάνουν στην Αθήνα, προφανώς βρίσκουν μια πόλη που αυτό που την εποχή εκείνη οι ίδιοι ονομάζουν χωριό. Είναι το Hop House που φτάνει στην Αθήνα με την αμάξα και τα λοιπά, και είναι ο οδηγός που του λέει «Το χωριό, το χωριό». Ο Χομπάς λέει «Ποιο χωριό είναι εδώ? Εδώ θέλω να δω την Αθήνα. Πού είναι η Αθήνα?» Η Αθήνα την εποχή, με την πρώτη απογραφή που εμείς έχουμε το 1824, είχε 9.000 ψυχές. Ήταν ένα χωριό. Αυτό που λένε μερικοί ένα λασποχώρι. Η απογοήτευση είναι το πιο λογικό πράγμα που μπορεί να πάθει ο Ευρωπαίος, κυρίως ας πούμε οι Γερμανοί ή οι Άγγλοι, που έρχονται με το κεφάλι γεμάτο από στίχους του Ευρυπίδη, του Σοφοκλή και τα λοιπά. Βρίσκουν κάτι εντελώς διαφορετικό. Όμως, και με αυτό κλείνω, το ταξίδι στην Ελλάδα ήταν αυτό που έπρεπε να κάνουν όποιος ήθελε να ήταν ο πολίτης του κόσμου. Υπάρχει μια εφημερίδα αγγλική στις αρχές του 19ου αιώνα που λέει «Αν θες να είσαι πραγματικά πολίτης του κόσμου, πρέπει οπωσδήποτε να πας στην Ελλάδα. Τουλάχιστον μία φορά στη ζωή σου πρέπει να πας στην Ελλάδα».
Very good. Thank you, Francesco. Again, quick summary in 30 seconds, starting with the end, how there was a British journal in the 19th century who said, if you want to be a citizen of the world, you have to travel to Greece. That shows the importance of Greece in the imaginary of the time. And that also explained what you said in the beginning, that Philhellenism and Mishellenism, right, the hatred of Greeks, go together. Why? Because of all these expectations, travelers who arrive in Greece expect to see a Plato and Aristotle. What they see instead, as you say, it's Athens resembling a village, or as it was called back then, a mud village. Right. Thank you for clarifying this. We have 5 more minutes, and I want to go back to the chat. We have at least 2 questions. One, Carla Pocchetti says, perhaps if there's time, Francesco, can you mention something about Philhellenism in Italy in relation to collectionism of Greek antiquities? And then Sofia Voutsaki says the fact that Vitali issued Androutsos' medical report means also that he was involved in the ugly side of the post-revolution era, the conflicts between Kalamarades and Agonistes, Peloponnesians and Roumeiotes, etc. How did he deal with this and with the underlying political tensions? Can you quickly, in 4 minutes, answer both?
Νομίζω ότι στην πρώτη ερώτηση της Κάρλα Μποκέτη θα μπορούσε να απαντήσει η Κωνσταντίνα, γιατί ξέρω ότι ετοιμάζει μια ωραία δουλειά και νομίζω είναι κατάλληλη για αυτή την απάντηση. Σίγουρα περισσότεροι προετοιμασμένοι από μένα. Εγώ θα έλεγα απλώς 2-3 πράγματα, αλλά νομίζω η Κωνσταντίνα μπορεί να μας πει περισσότερα. Συγγνώμη, Κωνσταντίνα, που σε...
Constantina on the spot.
I think you should answer the second question, and then we'll see if we have time. We'll talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, for the second question, Sophia. Okay. Ο Βιτάλη πέθανε το 1827. Τότε δεν κατάφερε να δει την post-revolution era στην Ελλάδα, πλέον στο ελληνικό κράτος. Πέθανε το 17 και δεν κατάφερε να δει ούτε ελεύθερη την Ελλάδα, και αυτό το λέει επίσης στην τελευταία παράγραφο του ημερολογίου, που κλείνει ακριβώς με αυτό το πράγμα, που ξέρει ότι σε λίγο θα πεθάνει και λέει κρίμα, σε όλα αυτά τα χρόνια δεν κατάφερα τελικά να δω την χώρα αυτή ελεύθερη, εύχομαι τουλάχιστον εσείς να το δείτε. Και έτσι ξεκίνησε και η εισαγωγή μου για το ημερολόγιο του Βιτάλ.
Okay, oh, that's it. So thank you, Francesco, for reminding us that Vitaly dies in 1827, and so he doesn't see post-revolutionary Greece, as he writes right at the end of his diary. And now, Konstantina, I don't know if you have some thoughts about the other question.
Well, it's a huge subject. Collectionism of Greek antiquities was very fashionable before the era of the Greek Revolution. It was fashionable because of the Hellenism, the literary trend, and and so it's interesting because all this fashion of Hellenism, like the love for everything ancient, and Johanna has written about this, of course, started from the Pompeii, ruins and so on. So Italy was part of this love of Greek antiquities. It sounds strange, but they make an ensemble. So they didn't feel particularly eager to get Greek antiquities in Italy because they had so many themselves. But later on, during the years of the emergence of archaeology and the museums as like public institutions in the late half of the 19th century, when Piedmont and the Italian state would make their own museums and collect antiquities, then there were many Italians who participated in the operations, or archaeological operations and adventurism and opportunistic situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there, Philhellenism was more of a tool towards an opportunistic career in archaeology, let's say, than love for antiquity.
Thank you, Konstantina. Joanna, any comments or final words before we close?
No, thanks.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Konstantina. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, everyone. Those of you who may think of other questions or have something to ask Francesco, I think I'm expressing my colleagues at the Center for Hellenic Studies and Evan and Ali in particular. Please send them to us, and then we'll send them to Francesco so that you can keep this conversation. I don't know, Mark, do you have any final words?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. It's okay.
I want to ask if you're planning to translate, not you, but you have translated that diary into any other languages.
Greek.
In Greek or in English, I mean, whatever.
Maybe in Greek. Maybe in Greek. I don't know.
That would be great. Let us know. Okay.
Thank you
so
all.
much.
Dear Mark, do you have any final words before closing?
No, just to thank everybody for your participation, and congratulations, Francesco, on this very fundamental work that you have done to bring out the importance of these sources. And thank you for putting that before us today.
Thank you all. Goodbye.